Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining for this, what I know will be a great conversation. My name is Megan Radecki. I serve as the director at the Hauenstein Center for Presidential Events at Grand Valley. But prior to that, I have spent a lot of time in local government and economic development, placemaking, and I was fortunate enough to get a tap on the shoulder to come moderate a discussion about those things stemming from some of the governor's recent announcements about her new initiatives. So we're really excited to have you all here today to talk a little bit about your experiences in Michigan, and looking forward to talking about that. But first, at the Hauenstein Center, we are dedicated to raising a community of ethical, effective leaders, and I think we could ask for no better person who embodies that than our governor. So, Governor Whitmer, please.
Thank you. Well, thank you, and thank you everyone for making time to be here. I really appreciate it. We've got a number of legislators, including our Senate Majority Leader, but we've got legislators from around this area, both chambers of the legislature, both sides of the aisle. You know, one of the things that I know is that I will only be governor for 3.5 more years. And we've got to grow our population in Michigan. And this effort has to be inclusive, it has to be strategic, it has to be informed by what young people are looking for, as well as by all the different aspects to making sure that this is a good place where you can have a great work life and a great family life. And so this work is really important. It's got to transcend a change in administration. It's got to transcend a couple of changes of administration. We won't be done in 3.5 years. We won't be done in 11.5 years. So your input is really important to us. And so I thank you so much for moderating. I thank the legislature for being here and being partners in this work, because none of us can do this alone. It's got to be all of us. And your voices are really, really some of the most important as we think about who we want to be and making Michigan a place where every person can make a good life and find opportunities. So thank you.
Yes, our pleasure. So we will start with some introductions real quick. We'll call this the lightning introduction round because we'd love for you all to keep it to about 30 seconds, your name, what you do, why Grand Rapids, and we'll start with Diane.
Hi, I'm Diane Wee. I just want to correct that my age was introduced as 27, but I'm not. I'm 36. Still a millennial.
Well, you look damn good.
Thank you. So I was born in Indiana, grew up mostly in Korea, and then I came to the States applying to grad school, and then I went to grad school in Chicago, moved around a little bit, and then a pandemic hit, and that was a time where I had probably most close people living in Michigan, so I came here thinking that pandemic will last for 3 months, and then it went on for 3 years, so I've been here since. Yeah, and I work for a company called Lookout, which is a software security what am I saying? I'm sorry. A digital security software company as a design researcher and strategist, and I've been with that company a little bit longer than I have been living in Grand Rapids. Yeah.
My name is Josh Bird. I'm currently a student finishing my final project in software engineering, making a jump from pharmaceuticals to software engineering. I've lived in Michigan most of my life. I was adopted from New York when I was 6. Just had a couple different years. I've grown up, in West Michigan area.
My name's Luke Warner. I'm the head of marketing at a company called Spellman Performance. We train athletes on speed development. I grew up in Kalamazoo, so a little bit south of here, relocated to Indianapolis, and then came back here for my education at Grand Valley, and have been living here ever since with my wife and 1-year-old daughter.
I'm Leanna Pelham, and I, with my husband, run a tutorial site where we teach people how to make websites. And we originally started that when we lived in Nashville, Tennessee, but then we moved back to Michigan back in 2014 and have been running it from here since then.
I'm Christina Wright. I grew up in Stanton, which is about an hour north of here, a nice little small town. Did my undergrad at Michigan State and have been in the healthcare sector ever since. Did a brief stint actually in Boston for about 6.5 years, where I started working with my current company, iPass, where we promote positive behavior change to improve patient safety through improved communication. And my husband and I actually chose to move back to Grand Rapids during the pandemic because we both had the opportunity to work remote, and it was just a perfect fit of everything we were looking for.
I'm David Green. I'm actually the Director of Communications for the City of Grand Rapids, but I'm here in a totally personal capacity this afternoon. I came here from Austin, Texas in 2020, in December of 2020, primarily for work, but there was also some family factors and some other things. And I had a couple different opportunities, but when I came to Grand Rapids to visit, I realized that this is truly a hidden gem and a really cool place, and so that sealed the deal for us. Prior to that, I was in the Army doing the exact same kind of work in public affairs for a career. So I've been all over the place, and I like it. I like it here.
I'm Winnie Brinks. I'm Senate Majority Leader and the proud senator for the Grand Rapids area. I have been in the legislature for 10 years and am incredibly proud to be able to lead in the legislature alongside Governor Whitmer in what we have branded our Majority for the People in the Senate Democratic Caucus. So we're very excited to talk about economic and community development and what that means for our people, our constituents, and for bringing more people to the state of Michigan. So we're really pleased to hear about the Commission on Population and all the conversations that we can have around that. I came to Michigan to go to college, and my husband and I stayed and raised our 3 grown daughters here. But they have now left the state for work. So this is a particularly relevant conversation for me too, personally. So thanks for having us.
I'm Mackenzie Almquist-Burry. I've kind of bumped around all over the U.S., born in D.C. and then moved to the Northwest, both in Idaho and Oregon, when my partner and I went to grad school on the East Coast. Then we were kind of trying to figure out where to live, and New Jersey's a little expensive, so we went on a cross-country road trip all the way back to the Northwest to visit family. And the first major stop was Grand Rapids, where my sister had recently moved, and she showed us all of the top places, gave the perfect tour, went all the way to the Northwest, and then we were kind of called back. So yeah, I've been in Grand Rapids for 5 years now, and have had other siblings then move here, and kind of have no ties here other than that one visit. So
Gotta send your sister a thank you note.
I know.
Great, good. Sounds like a great ambassador for you.
I try and tell her.
That's awesome. Great. So, so there's a couple folks here who've grown up in Michigan, and so I'm wondering, for those who've grown up here, what keeps you here, and have you ever thought about moving elsewhere? And for those of you who did not decide to do that, what was that?
Yeah, I grew up in Southeast Michigan and then came to Grand Rapids to go to Grand Valley. And then soon after graduating, moved to Nashville, Tennessee for about 4 years and worked down there a couple different jobs until my husband and I started our company. And I think one of the biggest things, we were deciding like, okay, we're feeling ready to buy a house and settle down. And we're like, but when we lived in Nashville, there's no easy access to water or outdoor activities the way that there is here. And that was just like this big draw. We would come and spend the entire month of August every year up here. I'm like, what if we just tried that for the entire year and give that see how that feels? And it's been really nice. Like, we haven't regretted that move once since we've moved up here. And also the cost of living. We've lived in some really fun parts of Grand Rapids, and every time we've moved, I'm like, this house would have cost twice as much if we lived in this house in a comparable neighborhood in Nashville. So it's felt really nice.
I echo a lot of what she said. I enjoyed spending time outside, and so I think being close to Lake Michigan is an easy draw, and then anywhere up north has been awesome. And then on the logistical side, like, cost of living is way better and just easier to find. I also think it's really easy to like build community around here, and part of that's because I've grown up here, but there's local churches and volunteer organizations and recreation opportunities that I think are just easy to get plugged into and easy to kind of cultivate. So that's been big for us.
Yeah, I don't want to touch on too much of the same thing, but cost of living obviously is a big thing. I thought about moving down to Florida or moving down to Texas or wherever, but there's no better weather in the summertime than I think is Michigan. Obviously, all the outdoor, everything that you can do outdoors is better, I feel. And just being able to live in a city that's big but not too big. You can still know a lot of people. There's plenty to do. And then, especially in Grand Rapids, it just comes alive. As the weather starts to warm, but there's always something every weekend, so it's nice.
Can I ask why Florida, why Texas?
Well, the Texas I thought about just because job opportunities and it's a pretty big tech hub right now. But if you go to any of like tech conferences that we have here, which we have some every few months, there is if she sees this for me, I can't remember her name, but her whole job is like to attract talent here, tech companies to start, build, or just come here. So we're trying to turn Grand Rapids into the next big tech hub in the next few years, hopefully. It's Florida. I think I don't know. A friend was down there and I liked it. I was having a good time, so
Yeah.
it's really special.
That's fair. You can go there in the winter.
Yeah.
That's fine. Then just come back. That's good. Yeah. So let's pivot on the Texas piece and go to David. So David, you did not grow up here and you came here from Texas. So you explained a little bit about why you're here. We'd love to hear more about that, but also I'm curious for the folks from outside, in addition to why you're here, what stereotypes are out there that maybe you had to fight to get yourself here?
So probably I'll start off with kind of how I wound up in Texas in the first place. My father was a career soldier. I was a career soldier. Fort Hood, now Fort Cavazos, is where I was stationed most of that time. And so when I left the Army, Austin was 35, 40 minutes down the road, so it was a perfect fit. And I just kind of fell into being there. I don't know that it was deliberate to live there. In terms of what brought me back up here, you said my father was in the Army. I actually graduated high school in Peoria, Illinois. My wife's family are from Northern Illinois. So I tell people I came from Texas, but I'm not of Texas, and we knew what we were getting into, right? Because probably the two big stigmas that you get from people, especially in the South, is going to be winters, partially because they're scared of it because they've never really experienced one before. When they did, they weren't equipped for it. So I've done that. The other thing that's kind of a challenge, I think, and this is a pretty big one nationally, is the concept of the Rust Belt. People still have that picture in their head of the late 90s, early 2000s, kind of declining infrastructure, declining communities like you saw. And I tell people all the time, like, listen, come and check it out, because it's not that anymore, right? I don't know when the last time you went to Pittsburgh was. Pittsburgh is not what you envisioned. It's not your father's steel town. Detroit is much more robust and vibrant than just the auto industry now. Grand Rapids, I kind of think is kind of a hidden gem, and I'm kind of torn a little bit between telling everybody that it's here, but at the same time I want to share it, because I don't want to share it. But all of these places, they have so much going on. There, but that stereotype still that these are declining communities, declining economies, declining places, and it's just because I don't know that nationally, bad news usually leads, I think, a lot of times, and that was just a narrative for so long that I don't know how we pivot off of that and get people to realize that those days are past us.
Kenzie, how are you? Any stereotypes, thoughts you had in your head about what Michigan was before?
Of course. Of course. Well, it's funny, I used to run a cafe in New Jersey, and people would ask me often, are you from the Midwest? And I was like, no, I'm just kind to you. Because there's a cultural thing, in New Jersey and New York and the area we were in, of just moving as fast as you can to get to where you need to go. And I was always like, well, I'll give you a smile with that cup of coffee. And so it's funny when people always thought I was from the Midwest. I'm like, I've never even spent time there. Now, I think moving here, I think Michigan nice is absolutely a thing. I think the, generally kind disposition of strangers is very true. I've also found that some of that stereotype that is true is also kind of hard. I'm not a real indirect person. I'm going to tell you exactly what I think, and I go into conflict head on, and that's hard. I think some of Michigan is like, oh, let's not say that quiet part out loud. But once you get to know people, once you have a relationship, you can find your people. So it's just culturally very different, but I wouldn't say that's something that I had to get over in order to stay. It's just been more a function of truly being part of the factory as well, getting to know people that want real relationship and want depth instead of just surface level, Michigan nice. But hey, it's nice to be greeted, still when you go to a coffee shop. That conversation lasts a little longer than it would in New Jersey, but.
That's great. Christina, I missed you. I remember growing up in Stanton, but you were in Boston for 6 years. So aside from having the opportunity to work from home and come here during COVID, were there any other obstacles, things you guys thought about before you came?
Oh, absolutely. My husband actually is a data scientist, and we put together a spreadsheet where we each had to independently rank 15 different factors about where do we want to move in 2020 because our 600 square foot apartment in Boston is not cutting it. And Grand Rapids was truly at the top of the list, and I had not, every time we came back to visit family over the course of those 6 years, you know, we spent most of our 20s in Boston, in, you know, a relatively large city. And so coming back to Michigan and re-experiencing things as an adult, I think is really what cemented our perspective of, you know, yes, on our spreadsheet, Grand Rapids is the place to be, but it also was just the fit for us. So even things like, I would mention like the arts and culture piece of things, that was a really big deal for us. Being able to go see Broadway shows or music concerts and things like that, but still be close enough to family, close enough to the outdoors. It was just kind of the epitome of everything we were looking for, and we're growing our family, so Grand Rapids is very friendly to that as well. So it was just kind of re-experiencing Grand Rapids in Michigan with the adult perspective, I think really cemented things for us a little bit more.
Do you still have that spreadsheet?
I know, I'm sure he does.
I would love to see it. I mean, I won't put it on Twitter or anything, but I would be curious. Like, what were the qualities that you were looking for that kind of made Grand Rapids such a standout?
So one was, you know, proximity to family and friends, which it could, you know, and we're an hour and 2 hours for his family away from family, but there was proximity to outdoor activities, arts and culture, you know, ability to travel if we wanted to, you know, go anywhere else. We have an international airport, and there were other cities on our list too that we had visited and kind of liked. Syracuse, Burlington, Vermont, Denver. We had a host of other cities that we were ranking on the same things, and it just kept coming back to Grand Rapids for both of us was always right at the top.
That's great.
I'm sure he'd be happy to share it.
Diane, anything to add about coming here?
I have a spreadsheet of trail running shoes if you'd want.
I love a spreadsheet. Yes, I would like that as well.
I actually came with 0 stereotypes because I mostly grew up in Korea, very close to Seoul, and then I lived in Chicago and then San Francisco for a little bit. And those were all the cities that I've experienced as an adult in the U.S. And typically, when a bunch of my Korean friends think of the U.S., they think of the metropolitan cities like New York, San Francisco, Chicago, so on and so forth. So this was an experience where I felt, oh, this is what most of the U.S. is like, or more representative of the rest of the country, excluding those really big crazy cities. And one of the things that was shocking to me was everybody started doing this or that when I came to Michigan. So like that was a bit of a, oh, what's wrong with them? Or maybe that's what everybody does. But I think there are a lot of good things that I experienced from Michigan. I think people are really great, that they come open-minded, they're always supportive. I've met only kind people. At the same time, coming from a background that's a little more outside of Michigan or the Midwest or the US even, is that the mindset is there for inclusivity and openness and supporting people like me. The representation is a little low. So a lot of people seem to be born and raised in Michigan, or they're coming for family ties. Me thinking of like family, my parents live in Korea, so there isn't a direct flight from Korea. So I'm thinking about like, oh, they're not gonna come here. I need to go to New York where my sister lives to see them. So like those are some of the considerations that I have. Yeah.
So Governor, a big part of your efforts is economic development. And so I'm curious, we've heard it all here. Central to where you decide to live, you know, there's gotta be good jobs, you've gotta have vibrant communities, and it's gotta be affordable and attainable housing. So when we think about the jobs piece, and you mentioned it a little bit about bringing more tech companies here, what kind of jobs do we need in Michigan and in the area to make sure you all stay here? Or given that some of you talked about remote work, is that less of a concern?
Well, if we can successfully turn Grand Rapids into another tech hub, that's going to attract a lot of people, obviously. And a lot of big companies like Amazon, for instance, are having people return to the office, so that's a benefit in itself. As far as other jobs go, you know, I think Michigan is also kind of looked at as a blue collar state. Because we were the car state for the longest time, and then what else did we really have to offer besides, being the leader in building cars? So, I don't know, maybe somehow making it known that, like, hey, we're known for this now and that, and whatever else we can put out there to attract anybody to come here.
Something probably Christina, I think, is going through right now, and I have a 6-year-old son, is childcare is really difficult. Not only is it like hard to be on waiting lists when you are pregnant, or finding a place, they're closed for COVID or virus, and you're like, oh shoot, now I don't have any childcare. There's no backup options, and so the volume of childcare in Grand Rapids doesn't exactly fit the need quite yet, which is a difficult thing when you're a young professional working remotely or in person for a company, to not have anywhere to take your kids to. That's probably one of the biggest pain points that I feel as someone with like a young child.
And it's just a shame because the rest of the infrastructure in the city, I think, is super supportive of families and young children. Because children's the zoo, the Frederick Moyer Gardens, we have so many options, but
then,
childcare
yeah.
is these things.
And a lot of them offer the summer camps. You're like, ooh, 9 to 11. Cool, that's great. I don't know how that's gonna work. Or like, wonderful places like Blandford has a full, robust, thing. But if you don't sign in to register for that summer camp within the first 2 minutes, the 10 spots that are available are gone. It's like trying to get tickets to a really fun concert, except that it's for your childcare versus like a fun one night out. And it's very competitive, really hard to get into places.
I know for me, when you talk about the types of jobs we need to attract and stuff, we need to probably recognize that there is this outdated concept, I think, that you start a job with a company, you'll finish that job with that company. And as I think now, even if you look at Gen Z, the folks coming behind us, the expectation is they may work as many as 30 or 40 different companies in a lifetime. And so attracting a variety, a diversity of jobs, so that as we go through these different life stages, what I'm doing in my 20s may not be what I settle on wanting to do in my 30s, and may not be what I want to do in my 40s. And so having the robust economies that kind of account for all of those various life stages, so I can pivot if I want and stay where I'm at. That's probably the biggest thing. Or also having that upward mobility, so that as you grow in your career and you start to take on, like higher level positions and stuff, you're not forced to move to a whole new community to get that next promotion to advance in your career. You can do it in that same area or region. So I think of, the policy wonk side of me, obviously it's like, oh no, you need diverse economies so that you can weather storms and collapses of one industry or another. It's all fine and great. From the personal perspective as an individual, you want those opportunities to exist both for you, your family members, throughout the entirety of your lifetime, so you can call a place home and not have to think, well, the economics of the situation are requiring that I go somewhere else because there's nothing here for me.
Mackenzie, thoughts about that? I mean,
Yeah,
you talked
so-
about working in a coffee shop in New Jersey, and now you're doing something different here.
I
so-
am, yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
So I used to run the factory as a community manager, and then the amazing Jeff and Alberta bought the place, and that was also the transition of my timeline. And so I now work for a company that I met through the co-working space. I run operations for a design agency. It's based out of San Diego technically, but our owner actually also just moved back to Michigan. His partner's from the Detroit area, and they wanted to be closer to family. So it's kind of funny that, it was random that I was in Michigan, and now it's, on purpose. But working with a fully distributed team since the very beginning, it's been that way. I love it and I adore it, but I think there's also some privilege to it. I know that, being in tech or being in a fully remote company is something that not everyone has access to. And so the way I dream about my life is that I get to choose where I live because I can work from anywhere. But I know that's not the case for everyone. So even my partner has a job in town, and if we moved, we have to find something else. And so I feel lucky to be in tech. I also know that's not the only solution. Just knowing how fragile things are and knowing, how much of a boom can we really is that sustainable? My partner's company has been around in Grand Rapids for 80 plus years. So we know there's sustainability there. We know that that's, a good option, but we kind of have both ends of it. But yeah, I always have to come into the factory though, because I'm remote working, but you know, still an extrovert, so.
Makes sense, I get that. So I'm hearing it's a little bit of both, right? It's build out some sectors, like the tech sector, but also make sure there's a robust mix of everything so that people can pivot easily. If they outgrow their career, if they're just looking for something different, how do we get the best of both of that? So easy strategy, right? Just go after it.
I mean, we know the child care piece, right, is fundamental to getting people into the workplace and being able to support growing families. We've done a lot of work on that, but there's a lot more to do. And so this is really helpful. If you were going to sell Michigan to someone in their 20s or 30s, what are the things you would highlight?
I love the proximity to the lake and the access that you can have to outdoor stuff. Particularly, I'm looking at the lens of Grand Rapids, where I live. I can within 20 minutes be on a nice little ski hill, or within 40 minutes I can be at the beach, which is extremely accessible. Which, as I mentioned, when I lived in Nashville, like you had to know someone with a boat if you wanted to enjoy water anywhere there. But here it's just anyone can just go to Holland State Park, and there it is, and lots of other options. And then having access to the Upper Peninsula and all this outdoor space, and then the international airport that you're about. You can go places. You're not also just trapped in here with your natural beauty.
I heard someone get ready to talk.
What I like about it is that this kind of goes back to being able to afford housing, is that you can go to, like, say, Hudsonville, that's 15 minutes away. You can buy a nice piece of land, be completely on your own, no neighbors, or you can choose to live in the city. But if you did want to buy a piece of land that's out there and you're secluded, it's going to take you 15 minutes to get back into town if you needed to. Not an hour you're sitting in traffic both ways. You know, you're not wasting that so much of that commute. And then just like reiterate what I said earlier, is just that you don't feel as crowded. I was born in New York and I went back to visit and I absolutely did not like it. You feel like you're just bumping into people all the time. But in Grand Rapids, it's nice. You're in the city that comes alive. There's always some kind of event going on downtown. There's concerts and things at the arena. We're building an amphitheater right downtown that's going to be great. It's supposed to open in a couple of years. We have a baseball team, hockey team that's pretty great, and a minor league NBA team. And yeah, so everything that you would get out of a bigger city, but without as much hassle, I would say, is what I would try to say.
My sister moved from Los Angeles, and it was for her husband's job at the time. But one thing that was really true for her, because she's a small business owner, she makes goods, concrete goods, and she found that moving from LA into Michigan, there is so much more of a culture of like buy local, Michigan made, artist markets, and a lot more artisan things. And so building, craft goods in Michigan is actually more feasible than when she lived in LA. Doing improv is more feasible in Michigan than it was in LA. And so some of the arts and culture also is like stronger than you might realize. And you kind of need that perspective as well. And I think the local artisan kind of scene in Grand Rapids especially is so strong. It helps you get through those winters that are just as bad as they say, So I think that really does help, and there's a strong connection, and that community is evident for sure.
I think I point to people because my wife and I we love food and drink, and so we came from a place. Austin obviously has a lot of options, but sometimes you're on a wait list for 8 to 10 months, and you pay a mortgage bill to go and eat dinner at some of these restaurants. Whereas here, I was blown away at first about the food here and how easy it was to get a table and how affordable it was. And that's when I learned about the Sekia Culinary Institute, where we train Michelin grade chefs here, and they stick around. And so you have all these really great food options. I'm sure everybody knows we're Beer City USA, for 11 years running now, 12 years running. So if craft beer is your thing, even if that's not your thing, ciders, seltzers, so all the drinks, all the foods, all those things, much of it produced right here in West Michigan, and it's just outstanding, and it's accessible, and it's affordable. You can actually enjoy those kinds of things and have that kind of a life.
was waiting for someone to talk about beer.
Talk about it.
I was, you know,
Governor.
I grew up here, and you couldn't, you know, you wouldn't buy alcohol on Sundays in Grand Rapids when I grew up, and it was so funny, you know, a dozen years ago when I saw Grand Rapids was being marketed as Beer City. I'm like, wow, Grand Rapids, like how cool. But I think the arts and the outdoors, and it's helpful to hear kind of what you would say to your contemporaries about what's good here. Like that's helping inform, I think, some of the work we need to do. So it's great.
So we talked about childcare a little bit. I'm curious to know, are there any major policy initiatives from a statewide level that you all think would attract more people to come? So can you think about anything that the governor and Senate Majority Leader Brinks could be doing at a statewide level that would say, make people pack up and move to Michigan?
So two of my mentors in my life are two of my former teachers. They're both high school teachers. They're both women. And I called them to kind of discuss what we're discussing today about what they think. And not only is it important to like obviously be able to attract jobs, but giving people obviously livable wages. And then as far as teachers, like they have, so for example, one of my friends, she teaches down in St. Joe area. She's been at it was a Title I school district for 5 years, and so they paid off her master's, which went up to $17,500, which is great because that's as much as her master's cost. And then that was only if you were teaching math, science, or special ed. If you weren't, it was just $5,000 they'd help you take off your student loans. So obviously, everybody knows a lot of Americans are struggling with student loans. So if we had some incentives, so like if we're trying to bring back a lot of teaching jobs, which we've obviously lost, it shouldn't maybe broaden that scope of, it doesn't just have to be in a Title I school. Maybe we'll give more money towards your student loans if you're willing to teach here for the next 3 to 5 years, or help out with your master's if you'd like that. Because I know right after the year that she got hers paid, I think they actually cut that from her program or from her district. So just incentivizing companies to be like, hey, like maybe if you are helping people make a little bit more of a livable wage, we can give some tax credits or whatever, however that works. I have no idea. But things like that.
Yeah, building on that, I mean, we have world-renowned universities in this state, and we have graduates who they don't stay, and why is that? And are there other ways we can incentivize them, even beyond things like teaching, any industry? Are there ways to incentivize new grads to stay in Michigan, as well as also to attract remote workers and others, again, who are privileged to have that opportunity to choose Michigan as the place to do their remote work? So I think, as we've already touched on in a few different things, it's multifaceted, but it's, I think for me, about keeping people here as well as drawing them in from out of state.
I think continuing to invest in the kind of, one, reinforcing our existing infrastructure, but then growing out the infrastructure of the future, whether that's 5G, whether that's fiber. Grand Rapids as a city actually has a pretty robust build out, so that's pretty accessible for most folks if you can afford fiber. And I do know you have the program where lower income families can access discounted rates now, but finding ways to ensure that we stay competitive as a state by providing the infrastructure we know these businesses and industries are going to need, and that includes remote workers who, they don't think of it that way, but it is an infrastructure challenge. If you're going to be a remote worker, you have to have access to reliable high-speed internet.
That's a good call. So we're just about to wrap up, but I do have one last question that Mackenzie hit on. So I really need to know, you guys, is winter really so bad here? And how do we use that as a selling point and not a deterrent to keeping people in Michigan?
I would say
And Mackenzie
yes.
doesn't get to answer.
It is that bad, but I think every region of the country has something that's just as bad. Like if I've thought about moving to Florida, but then I can't go outside for 3 months of the summer anyway. And so there's wherever you go, there's going to be something that is the winter. But I think there's not a ton of other negatives like we've all touched on, other than that. So.
I mean, the perks of winter include that the bugs don't get so big.
It's true.
And there's certain months you don't have to mow or do any yard work. So there's lots of small perks that come with winter, and then also getting the people travel out to like places to go skiing, whereas here you get to go do it locally. Grand Rapids or even a little farther north.
I mean, don't come here for the skiing, but you
No,
can
but
ski
if
if you
you
come
can
here.
do it,
Like,
yeah. Things
I,
are faster.
I do think, I mean, that's like, to answer also your last question about policy, like, the beauty of Michigan that we've all talked about is also under threat. And so protecting and addressing climate change as it relates to Michigan is so important. I mean, I think we all kind of joke like, well, at least we won't be with those fires, or, you know, those affect my family in the Northwest. But that's a real implication. And there are a ton of things that, you know, young people talk about, like, well, is Michigan really that way? Or will I really be protected? Will my water be safe? Like, all of those factors absolutely play into conversations. It's not just the great beer that we're advertising. It's also, you know, like, yeah, now you can feel protected in those ways. And obviously, you know, being Pride Month and knowing that, you know, I have a lot of friends that moved from Michigan because they weren't safe. And they've since moved back because now it's safer to be here and be open and be who they are. And so, you know, a lot of the reasons we all get to stay here or live here or come back is because someone else made it a safe place. And so that has to continue, or else it won't be, you know.
It would be nice to, as time goes on, to have Michigan water topics be pivoted away from bad fundamental things that have happened to like, hey, now we're on the cutting edge of these things and we're improving infrastructure so that stuff won't happen again. That, you know, we don't have these big PFAS or Flint water crisis things that are our main news points, but actually positive things that make it a really cool place to be and safe.
That's a great point. Well, I want to thank everyone for spending some time. I think hopefully Senator Brinks and Governor Whitmer took away or got some nuggets that they can use. And of course, if either of you want to share a couple of final words, certainly want to give space.
Winnie, if you want to, then I'll jump in. You're good.
Water, water, water. Technology. You know, making sure that we're looking forward to what people are looking to the place they want to be for the next 10 years or 20 years. It's one thing to get someone to come here, but we need to keep them too. And so that forward orientation of looking at the kind of community that we're creating is really important. So I hear consistent echoes with a lot of conversations that we've had around this. So it's encouraging. I think we've got a lot of good ideas to start with. And then framing it, I love the idea of trying to talk about the positive parts of winter in Michigan. And it could be kind of funny and fun and, you know, realistic, but positive.
Yeah.
And I think that could be a cool thing to do. So, and I keep thinking about my kids and what they're looking for. You know, they're 22, 24, and 26, and they're exploring. But at some point, I would love it if they can land here and they talk about these things. Not so much childcare and housing yet. Housing
Eventually,
a
yeah.
bit, but not like buying a house. But yes, right now they're roaming. So, but yeah, it's an incredibly important conversation. So I'm grateful to hear from all of you.
This is an undertaking, right? And we're in earnest working to make sure that Michigan's got a plan for growth. And it's a growth of our population, it's growth of our economy, it is telling our story. I think it's lovely that you talk about Texas, because anyone who's met a Texan knows that they're insufferable practically, because they all brag about Texas. No matter what political side of the aisle they're on, everyone is selling Texas all the time. We got an even more powerful story to tell, but Michiganders are humble, right? We're kind, we're humble. We don't come out and brag everywhere we go, but I think we got to get better at it and telling our story, and that's why I really was curious to hear what's important to you, but also how would you talk about Michigan to your contemporaries so that can help us make sure that we're staying focused on the right thing. So thank you so much for getting this going and keeping it moving forward. Thank you all for being here. I would love to know, as you're mulling over this conversation or you're talking to any of your mentors or you have additional thoughts, we would welcome them. Because I do think we got a powerful story to tell. We got work to do, no question. But when you stack us up in the spreadsheet, we're going to rise to the top. And I want that spreadsheet too, okay? Thank you. Yeah, thanks everybody.